December 28th, 2021, Betty passed away, surrounded by her loving family. To Betty and Bill Mann, together again. Love to Rhonda, Sue, and Gary, Jimmy and Teresa, Adam, Jamie, Casey, and all those I haven't met. My heart aches with yours. I remember hating getting out of bed on winter mornings at the farm because the house was so drafty and cold. I'd begrudgingly put on my socks, go downstairs, throw wood in the stove, and shiver as I looked out the window. There was Betty, almost silhouetted by the dawn's light, already throwing square bales of hay that we had helped them collect and stack that summer off the back of the pickup. As Mr. Mann would ease the truck through the field, making tracks in the fresh blanket of snow, the point of Betty's silk floral scarf tied over her set hair and under her chin would flap wildly in the bitter wind. Then Mr. Mann would stop, and as the steamy clouds of exhaust puffed out the tailpipe, Betty would hop off the tailgate, bust up the thick ice in the water tank with a hammer, and let the cattle gather around her to drink. She'd talk to them, and sometimes yell and smack one on the hind quarter to keep it from crushing her toes. Then she'd climb back on the bed and bang the roof of the cab to get Mr. Mann going again. I thought she was getting up there in age back then, and that was 20 years ago. I wanted to feed the cows for her, or at least help, but she said she'd have nothing of it. She loved it. I used to tease her that every winter she'd wear the same pair of ratty old moon boots with the soles held on by duct tape wrapped up and over the toe. She'd giggle and annually repeat that they were the warmest she'd ever had, and it only took that little bit of tape to keep them one more season. Betty loved her husband, Mr. Mann, in that totally comfortable and completely herself kind of way. She idolized her two kids, spoke only glowingly about their spouses, and adored her grandkids. Every Saturday without fail, she and Mr. Mann would go on a loop, a day drive with 3 stops and back home, and I was so excited when they invited me to join them. First was the general store, where Mr. Mann would get a cup of coffee and a few of those old-fashioned horehound candy sticks, and Betty would stock up on moon pies for his sweet tooth throughout the week. Everyone and the clerk knew them, so it took a while to move on. Next was the giant flea market where she'd get giddy shopping for secondhand trinkets, figurines, holiday dish towels, and really anything that tickled her fancy. She'd chatter on about and admire her bargain finds for the rest of the trip, saying what she'd do with them or where she'd place them around the trailer. Then, inevitably, she'd stack them up in the old abandoned farmhouse among all her other treasures she collected, and never touched again. Mr. Mann never so much as rolled his eyes about this, only saying she could have worse vices. All those years and he was still smitten with her. In fact, I think the only thing Mr. Mann didn't like about Betty was when she'd go to Las Vegas with her daughter for a week. It wasn't the gambling that bothered him. It wasn't a vice. He said she deserved a fun time away, and she loved that city. And only that particular city, she'd say. She was a farm girl at heart, after all. I just know he got real lonesome for her. So I'd invite him over for dinner or offer to bring him whatever we were eating or whatever he wanted. But he'd always go to the big wheel because he said the waitresses were nice and talked to him, and they'd give him an extra plastic cup of fruit cocktail for dessert to take home. The final stop on the loop was the stock sale, where they bought or sold cattle, or just looked and visited with old friends, which was most of the time. Betty loved all animals, and they loved her back, especially her little dog Mitzi and their donkey Honk, who ran to the fence and made such a fuss whenever he saw her. "Look how he sings to me," she'd exclaim. And then she'd go on and on talking to him, and he'd keep honking on and on from all the attention he got from her. On the steel-tongue hitch of their mobile home, she put a piece of plywood where she'd set out her pots of hen and chick succulents and a cactus that survived there year-round, which reminded her of her daughter in Phoenix. All along the back of the trailer was a row of the most perfect and aromatic rose bushes she pruned with precision. Betty taught me to grow cucumbers out of an old car tire. She'd put a mound of soil in there with a stake pounded in the center and seeds around the base. They'd go straight up that stake for easy pickings, and I still do it that way because of her. The last time I saw Betty was in 2013 at Mr. Mann's funeral. Although she didn't look any older than when I'd seen her a decade earlier. Sadly, she didn't know me anymore. I would have been more upset about it, but she still gave me her famous beaming smile and twinkling eyes, called me honey when she thanked me for coming, and squeezed my hand. There's no doubt in my mind there will be a grand reunion in heaven when Betty meets up with all her beloveds, human and furry, who went before her. But I suspect Mr. Mann will be the most emotional. He will have thought he's been in hell this whole time without her. Peaceful passing, Betty. I already miss you. Give Mr. Mann my love.